Culverton Smith laughed. He's so creepy. Sherlock and John hugged. Maybe they'll kiss next time. Hashtag fandom. Hashtag Johnlock. East Wind. I know that reference. Miss Me? I know that one too. Mrs. Hudson driving away from the police? Hashtag badass. Sherlock's most chilling episode ever. We're gonna talk about Sherlock, the lying detective. Episode 2 of Series 4. Sherlock must save John Watson, but in order to do so, he needs to get Culverton Smith to confess that he's a serial killer, not a serial eater. The second episode is pretty awful. I found myself so frustrated with the lying detective that I just couldn't enjoy it. I watched it once, wrote down all my notes, watched it again just to see if I was in a bad mood, and I wasn't in a bad mood. It's just a bad episode. But we're gonna break down some things that really were glaringly obvious why this episode was just not very good. But I will also pick out a few things that I did like, because there are a few little bits in there that I thought were quite fun. Let's talk Culverton Smith, the most boring serial killer in anything ever. He's a serial killer that doesn't kill anyone. I mean, he does. They say he does, but we don't see it. We don't see anything. We just see him eating cereal. Lol. Because serial killer, serial eater. I'm a serial killer. Whatever. And there was just kind of Jimmy Savile archetype going on with Culverton Smith, and that is, you know, I know that Sherlock sometimes drifts away from, you know, what the books are like, you know, they do that often, which is fine, and they do that sometimes with the villains as well. They'll keep little bits, but there's something really cool and villainous about Culverton Smith in the books that was just completely lost in this episode. There's a lot of science-y things that are important to Culverton Smith in the books that I thought would have been a really cool thing to exploit in this story, and they just don't. You know, I get the appeal of, you know, Sherlock going after a serial killer who is a huge profiled person, you know, very big in the public eye. The problem with this episode, and the problem with Culverton Smith is I just didn't give a shit. I didn't care about him. I didn't find him scary. I didn't find him villainous. Sure, he laughed. He was kind of creepy. He had, you know, jacked up teeth. But they didn't show me anything that made me think, oh, this guy's really evil. You know, they didn't. Even the drug thing, when they had their confession time, sure, it's creepy, but in the context of the episode, it's like, well, that's the creepiest thing he does. It's a really missed opportunity. To have a serial killer who has access to the hospital is a very scary thing, and that is something they could have done so much more with, and they do nothing with it. Nothing. I was so bored with this episode. I feel like they are struggling to fill 90 minutes of solid mystery, which I don't get, because there's so many other shows that do this all the time, and I don't know why Sherlock, since Series 2, has not been able to have a solid 90-minute mystery. God, the drugs. I'm so sick of Sherlock on drugs. I don't care. Yes, there's a bit of drug use in the books, but the level of drug use now in Sherlock is at elementary levels. Like, it's just, they're throwing it in your face every episode. In the books, it's not that big of a deal. He's not high every time he's on a case. So why is he just always tripped on drugs? Why is everything this drug-infused fiasco with him? And Mrs. Hudson, she really annoyed me this episode. Normally I like Mrs. Hudson, but I found the whole car chase from the police to go to John's therapist just stupid. You know, of course, the car screeches into camera frame and it's an Aston Martin, because apparently Sherlock is just James Bond now. She gets out of the car and the police are like, ma'am, do you know how fast you're going? And she's like, it's all fine. You know, here's the government on the phone. It's like, you're Mrs. Hudson. You're supposed to be bringing them tea and bringing them clients and having little interactions with them. You're not a action hero. There's a frightfully annoying scene when she turns to John after she's telling him about Sherlock's kind of mental breakdown, and he's like, oh, did you call the police? And she's like, I'm not a civilian. Yes, you are. And this brings to my next point, is I'm so tired of everyone connected with Sherlock and Mycroft having this kind of superiority and above the lawness. It's old and silly. I get like John not having to deal with much when he shot the cabbie, you know, in a study in pink. That kind of makes sense. You know, I get Sherlock using his brother's name to get into Baskerville military base. You know, I get some of this stuff. But at the same time, it's like, you quit pulling out the government card, we're above you all. You're not. So stop it. Sherlock has gone from what used to be believable fiction into unbelievable fiction. You could easily walk around these streets of London and kind of think, ooh, you know, Sherlock and John, they're running around doing cases. You know, you could go to Gower Street and past Speedy's and pretend that you're on a fake Baker Street. Like, they made this show kind of tangible and believable, what Conan Doyle did with the original stories, but it's now just escalated into this realm of unbelievability that it's making the show unwatchable. It's making these stories unenjoyable. We learn more about Mary's tape as well, which just adds more fuel to the fire. Some of the most stupidest logic I've seen in Sherlock yet. Or as we look more into the tape, she tells Sherlock in full that you have to save John Watson, but the only way for you to save John Watson is for you to put yourself in danger so that John can save you. And by you basically letting yourself nearly die, John will be able to save you. What? If you're not even friends with John, if you're not even interacting with John, if you're not speaking to John, how the hell is he going to know? And sure, yes, there's this big grand, Sherlock sets this whole big grand thing up so that he can kind of get back into John's life. That still doesn't mean that John's going to come save you in the end. You know, John barely gets to Sherlock in the end, and I know that's like building the tension and all that kind of stuff, but to me it was just kind of like, no, this is just a dumb plan. This is a plan that barely worked. If John had watched that video 5 minutes later, you'd be dead. Did you really want to go that far? Like, you know, Mary's logic was just dumb. So her tape, her thing, what she was, you know, we now understand why she said, you know, go to hell, Sherlock Holmes. She was telling him to go to hell and come back. You know, find a bad guy that you know is going to want to kill you. And, like, it's just so easy for Sherlock to go find a bad guy that wants to kill him. For John, boy, how is this dude not had a mental breakdown? How is John Watson still functioning in the brain? I mean, he's been on these crazy-ass cases with Sherlock. He was tortured by Sherlock in Hound of the Baskervilles. His friend died, killed himself in front of him, only to re-emerge 2 years later and prove it was a hoax. His wife was a liar and came out to be a super spy, whatever the hell. They get married, have a baby, and she gets shot, but in between then he has an affair with, spoiler alert, Sherlock's sister. And then his new therapist that he's been seeing for a while turns out to be Sherlock's sister stroke girl he had the emotional affair with. And you're like, how has your brain not exploded inside of your skull? Are you just that f***ed up inside that you can just cope with all this stuff? Again, this is where they pushed the unbelievability too far. But let's talk about Eros. So there's this thread going through the episode about Sherlock's, brother. Watson kind of deduces from Mycroft that there's another brother out there, which, is kind of been teased through and is kind of exciting. I mean, I was interested in it. But then at the end of the episode, like I said, John's therapist reveals to be, you keep wondering about this brother, but you never think about Sherlock's sister. And then she pulls a gun on him and shoots him. Well, she fires a gun. We don't know if he shoots him. I mean, the episode kind of teased that we were leading towards Sherlock's brother, Sherringford. But the finale of this episode revealed his sister has been hiding. I mean, it's tricky because we don't actually know if there is still a Sherringford out there. It very well could be. But we learned that she's been kind of manipulating things for a couple of episodes now. So she is the woman who, was winking at Watson on the bus. She was the woman who dressed up like Culverton's daughter to, I don't know, talk with Holmes and tell Holmes about Culverton, and give Holmes this piece of paper that was, written by Culverton's daughter about, kind of hinting that he's a killer. And she's like, oh, I've got the piece of paper through a mutual friend. Is this Moriarty? Well, why did Culverton even keep this piece of paper that he took from his daughter? That kind of incriminated him a little bit. Just didn't make a lot of sense on that side. There's a few kind of curiosities about this sister. One thing is I'm just dead tired of all the Holmes siblings just turning out to be, you know, batshit crazy. Kind of really saw that coming. Didn't really want to see that angle, to be honest. But then again, we don't actually know if she is Sharonford. You know, I think it's obvious that she's going to connect to Moriarty because there's a whole Miss Me connection, and it almost feels like, you know, she's the one who's responsible for the Moriarty video, where he's like saying, "Do you miss me? Do you miss me?" What her wider plan is kind of yet to be explored. You know, there's this whole, you know, chit chat of in the episode about, you know, people kind of stop thinking after 3, so it's kind of like, okay, well, this is the 3rd Holmes sibling, so is there a 4th? And if there is a 4th, is that overkill? And obviously, since Abominable Bride, there's been this tease of, is it twins? Is it twins? And Holmes was like, no, it's never twins. No, it's never twins. I'm now thinking that Eros might just very well be Sherlock's twin sister, because it just feels like this show could just be that dumb now. She might not be, but at the moment I kind of have this feeling that she might be. And I also have this feeling that Sharonford is still out there, and or is a code for something else. You know, Sharonford could very well be a code for Moriarty's twin, and there's definitely something out there. The 3 hint and the twin, you know, tease, one of those is gonna come out. So there are some things that I liked in the episode. That Sherlock said the game's afoot. I liked the scene where Watson worked out how Sherlock worked out how Watson was going to pick this particular therapist. That was fun. That kind of showed John's cleverness. I did think the nurse bit was rather funny when John's like, oh, you know, it's my blog, and she's like, really? You write the stories? That kind of felt like a bit of a nod to people who don't understand that John is the narrator of the actual original stories. When she did say, it's going a bit downhill, isn't it? That was a little bit too obvious. When the franchise is actually declining, don't make it obvious. I was weirdly happy about the Irene Adler scene where Sherlock's phone goes off and it's the Irene Adler moan, and John's like, she's alive. You know she's alive now. Hold on. You know, they just have this conversation about Irene and, you know, how, you know, Sherlock really should try to, I don't know, go bang her in High Wycombe. That bit was not as fun. What I liked is that they actually had a conversation finally about the fact that they both now know Irene is alive and out there somewhere. I don't know, there was something really nice about that moment. And so there were scenes throughout the episode that I really did enjoy to some extent. And I also like the fact that John was like, you know, look, you didn't kill Mary, And I also like the fact that John admitted that he had an emotional affair. But for me, where the episode really started to kind of just go haywire, the amount of time wasted on drugged up, trippy Sherlock, it waned really quickly and pulled me out of the story pretty quick. 40-50 minutes of the episode before, you know, we really kind of get into the mystery, and by this point, you know, there isn't a mystery to solve. We're just kind of twiddling our thumbs waiting for a confession, which I just didn't find that very clever. You know, I think there's also a lot of there's a lot of unanswered questions. The fact that Sherlock didn't recognize his sister sitting in front of him. Obviously, she disguised herself as Culverton's daughter, but I just feel like Sherlock Holmes, being the man that he is, should be able to see through disguises. When he's on drugs, as the show implies, his senses are so heightened that he's almost even more superhuman. Why didn't he see through all this? He went out with her and they walked all over London. He spent a whole evening with her, but he didn't realize it was his sister. There's also a bit where Lady Smallwood, or whatever her name is, asks Mycroft, you know, about Sharonford. And he says, you know, Sharonford is secure or something along those lines. And I'm like, well, okay, so if she is supposed to be this Sharonford character, you know, how does Mycroft not know that she's not secure? As well, Mycroft being Mycroft, how does he not know that their crazy kid sister is bobbing about London? That's what I'm saying. Like, if there is a 4th Holmes brother or Holmes sibling, it's kind of like another crazy one. But at the same time, it's also like Mycroft, king of knowing everything and drone following Sherlock. How do you not know that she's right there with Sherlock? You've been watching the apartment the whole time. You must keep tabs on these people. You know, then again, kind of like last episode, there were a few bits that just waffled on. And one of those was, there was about a 15-minute deduction of a piece of paper. And, you know, from this piece of paper, Sherlock deduced where it was in the house and how big the kitchen was and all this kind of stuff, and deduce things about the person's life, and it was interesting and fun and cool, but it was like, fuse these deductions in with the actual mystery within the story. We don't need to know about this stuff if it's not going to be vital to the story. You know, that's what makes deductions fun, is when the deductions are used to solve the final crime, and they just weren't. I think they missed a trick with this episode. I think they could have done something really cool. I think the idea of this serial killer inside of a hospital is really scary and really cool. They really could have built something around that, a chase through the NHS to find this serial killer. I mean, as opposed to, you know, a drug-tripped Sherlock and angry Watson. There we are. We have one more episode to go. Apparently Stephen Moffat said it's the finale. You know, so it's kind of like, well, is there going to be any more episodes? At the moment, I'm kind of done. I don't really want there to be any more Sherlock. I feel its time is done. I feel the writing has waned. I feel it's not as clever and as unique as it used to be, and it's time to move on. All I can hope now is that this final episode is genuinely good, genuinely exciting. I'm looking back at kind of Series 3. I find myself enjoying Series 4 a little bit more than I did Series 3. There is still this heavy weight on the series, this kind of, we're trying too hard to be spies and espionage as opposed to detectives and crime fighting within London. When people think Sherlock, they think modern day London crime mystery stuff, not James Bond super spy. So yeah, what did you think? How did you find The Lying Detective? Comment below, let me know, and we will see you next week for the final episode, The Final Problem.